This video is sponsored by DoorDash. 2024 had some awesome practical effects and elements used in some absolutely insane ways, from the depths of space to the depths of the ocean, or, well, technically sort of at the bottom of the ocean, but also dry? Yeah, we'll get to that monstrosity later on in this video. The point is, practical effects were everywhere in 2024 in both popular films and low-budget film, and we're going to take a look at some of the most interesting and unique effects throughout 2024. And of course, we need to acknowledge up front the large role VFX and CGI still play in many of these effects, even if they are not always revealed to us. So keep that in mind throughout this video. Now let's get into some awesome practical effects. First up, we have this awesome and very chilling scene from the film Civil War, where the main protagonists are driving through a forest. The forest had been set ablaze by a nearby battle, and they had to drive through with their wounded friend. At first glance, this scene feels like most of it is likely CGI, right? Well, Director Alex Garland turned to his special effects team to come up with a way to visually pull this off practically. They told him, "We're going to nail this. We know exactly what we're going to do. We're going to try something that hasn't been done. Trust us." That's always my favorite thing to hear from a department, Garland said. The team came up with a creative solution, rigging artificial trees in the forest that were able to start up flames with the push of a button. For the insane slow-motion sparks flying everywhere, they would utilize dry charcoal to create the dizzying amount of sparks that bounce all over the place and impact the car. There was a fire department and big hoses ready to put out everything if it got out of control, said Garland. But the really magic thing they did was, directly ahead of the hero vehicle with the actors in it, there was a truck, and in the back of the truck, there was a large metal cylinder that they created, which generated a massive amount of heat, like you would in a kiln or a pizza oven. They would heat the charcoal bundles to incredibly high temperatures and chuck them into the cylinder, where they would explode almost immediately, sending all of these sparks flying. It's a visually impressive effect, and is a standout in this rather bleak film, in a hauntingly beautiful sense, given the devastating scene that just occurred prior to this.
What kind of American are you?
Hey guys, I think I'm seeing a volcano erupting.
Next up, we have the film ISS, a pressure cooker film about astronauts and cosmonauts that deal with the pressures of being in space on a space station while the world below them descends into nuclear war. What's visually interesting with the film is the claustrophobic nature they really give you of what it's like to live on a space station, and director Gabriella tried to get everything right, even down to stray ketchup packets that will inevitably get lost over a space station that's been around for decades. That also carried over to trying to maneuver yourself around the space station in zero gravity, a feat that was at times painful for the actors to deal with. "We put the actors in harnesses and used tethers to float them," said the director. "Unfortunately, they were extremely uncomfortable to wear. It was hard on their bodies, and they would sometimes go numb in their legs. And every time someone had to go to the bathroom, it took 45 minutes to get them out of the harness and back into it again." Well, this was shot practically with wires. The director did note the work it took for the VFX team to deal with it, saying, "It took us a year or more to digitally remove every tether from every single frame of every scene in post. Looking back on it now, I see why people don't go do zero gravity in movies very often." Now we come to a little film called Dune Part 2. I'm sure none of you saw it this year. Pretty quiet film, not a lot of marketing around it at all. Mixed in with some incredible VFX and CGI elements was a lot of practical effects as well. I'm sure you saw where they created a massive section of the sandworm for Timothée Chalamet to ride on while getting hit in the face with tons of sand. But one practical element from the film that is really cool is the baby sandworms they created. Gerd Nefzer, the special effects supervisor, explained how they were created, saying, "We made a worm out of 8 balls connected with a chain and skinned in a special spiral tube in the sand. Director Denis Villeneuve wanted it to react like a snake and to jump like a snake, nightmarish and fast." They would achieve this by creating 2 tracks underneath the sand, one for the circular motion and the other for the worm when it jumps out of the sand. In all, there were 5 puppeteers who controlled different movements of the worm to bring it to life. In a movie that's full of amazing effects of all kinds, it's pretty cool to see these smaller parts of the film get just as much attention and detail. But there's one aspect of Dune to me that is quite intriguing, the fact that I can't really recall anyone in the film actually eating anything. It seems like they are always either ingesting spice, biting on poisonous explosives, drinking their own sweat, and also downing some lovely worm juice that may or may not kill them. But thanks to our sponsor DoorDash, you don't have to resort to the local food of Arrakis. With this on-demand food delivery app, you can get a meal delivered, or flowers, groceries, or even some baby powder to get the sand off of you if you have issues with it like Anakin.
I don't like sand.
Look guys, I'm releasing like 5 or 6 videos the week before Christmas. You think I'm cooking right now? I use DoorDash all of the time to get food when I'm too busy editing. They have almost any type of food to choose from right there in the app, and I personally get food delivered almost on a weekly basis straight to my front door. And with so many great shows like Silo, Arcane, and a Dune series being released for the holidays, let DoorDash be your door to more. Download the DoorDash app right now to get almost anything delivered, and using the code Voyager 2024, get 50% off up to $10 on your first order of $15 or more.
Just wondering, after this movie, if I don't go to prison, and you're not busy, maybe we could go to a beach somewhere.
Fall Guy, a movie about a stunt performer, directed by a former stunt performer, with a lot of other stunt performers appearing all over this film, was filled to the brim with incredible practical stunts and effects. Perhaps one of the most impressive was the one that broke a World Guinness Book record for most barrel rolls in a car by a stunt driver, Logan Holiday. They set out to beat the standing record of 7 rolls set in 2006 by Adam Curley for the James Bond film Casino Royale. And getting the record was something the director mentioned as being very planned, saying it was something that we wanted. We really wanted to do next level stunts, like in the spirit of these classics. And I challenged the stunt team to be like, if we're going to do this and tell a story about stunt people and celebrate our industry, we better do some epic stuff. And so I actually wrote in the script, Colt breaks the world record. It would take the stunt team 5 months of testing, researching, and a lot of math to figure out how to make it work.
So the cannon roll is a classic stunt that's been around since obviously the beginning of cars and films. And really what happens is the special effects department works with stunts, and they actually put a cannon in the bottom of the car. Now it's usually the use of hydraulics and air pressure. It used to be black powder and a log. And you place it in a position of the car, and as the car's going at speed and you hit the charge, it flips the car and the car rolls.
And they had only 2 attempts to get the stunt down right, having only 2 stunt vehicles available at the time of the shoot. The first attempt was unsuccessful in getting that record barrel roll.
We did the first take. It was still an amazing roll, but it wasn't what we were trying to achieve.
With the first attempt looking good but not hitting the record they wanted, they would try again one more time. With the second attempt, they nailed it and achieved 8.5 rolls, beating the record, looking cool in the process, and most importantly, surviving the stunt.
A lot is made of the thumbs up, but it's such a relief when you finally see it. And when he finally gave the thumbs up and we understood that he was okay and that he broken this record, it really was like a day I'll never forget.
Ryan Gosling marveled at the role that Holiday played when recounting the events before and after the stunt. He's buckling me into the car for a stunt he's about to do, and then he goes on to do about 8.5 cannon rolls. Then he pulls me out of the car and pats me on the back for the stunt that he just did. In any other movie, you wouldn't know that, but in this movie, you do. There's a lack of recognition for the contribution that stunt performers make to cinema and some of the best moments in the film that we love so much. That ends here. It's pretty awesome to see the stunt guys really get some love, finally. Now, if only the Oscars would give them an award category. This A24 horror film is a coming-of-age drama, but instead of all the awkward voice changes and acne, these teenagers have to deal with a supernatural world that seems to reside in a bizarre TV show called The Pink Opaque. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of details on what was practical versus digital effects in the film, as I would include a lot more in this video. But there was one aspect that was practical, and all of them were made to look like it came from 1994. Very cheesy and corny looking effects, with director Jane Schoenbrunn saying they would get in early renderings from the VFX team, and when the team completed it and made it look better, they would want to go back to the early versions, saying, I would tell them, we had to bring it back to that. So I forced them to take the 2024 state-of-the-art work to look like 1994. But for the monsters, from the very beginning, I remember thinking for the next film, let's go monsters. Just getting to create monsters from scratch in the way that we did it with a lot of practical makeup effects and the people in the makeup chair for like 10 hours for one shot. Pretty crazy getting these very cheesy looking 90s horror film monsters to be incredibly creepy. Next up, we have Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, with director Wes Ball taking the reins for the first film in the new trilogy for the series. Now, you might be thinking, how can there be practical elements to what is essentially a mocap suit film? Well, even though they were in mocap suits, director Wes Ball still liked to film in practical environments and even on location. For one of the more interesting sets was the crow's nest set that they built, but building it in a way that looked more like it was built with primitive tools, not by humans.
We basically built a nest inside of a cable tower. We had to build a precise model with the sticks in the right area, what was going to be structural, how much weight could it take, because we had a certain amount of characters in there, we had a fight sequence.
And aside from really selling the entire world, with nature reclaiming human-built landmarks, destruction and violence is part of this story too, which meant that some of the intricately built sets had to be set ablaze.
We have to burn the place down, so we actually did burn some huts, did some controlled fires as well.
Despite receiving some backlash over looking overly CGI for some theatergoers, Furiosa: A Mad Max Saga had a lot of elements that were similar to its predecessor Mad Max Fury Road, including shooting on real stunt vehicles, even if a lot of the background elements were filled in with CGI later on, as was Mad Max Fury Road. One action sequence in particular was so complex it took them 78 days to film a 15-minute scene.
The sequence Stairway to Nowhere, I mean, we've been shooting it for 6 months. And let me tell you, it takes dedication.
This rig scene was one of the highlights of the film, and while CGI still played a role in making it fully come to life, the work that went into the practical filming of it was impressive. The Watcher started off looking like a really interesting concept for a horror film, with a super creepy vibe and some interesting set design and concepting, but it quickly became apparent that the movie was a dud with a disappointing finale. That being said, there was one practical element in this film that was pretty impressive: the massive one-way mirror, which gave some really interesting visuals to play with for the film. The mirror, which was built in the studio, according to director Ashana Shyamalan, took 48 hours to put the mirror in and take out, so they needed to plan their interior and exterior shots accordingly. And of course, filming against such a large mirror was no easy task. Trying to keep boom mics, cameras, and other crew members out of the reflection was a monumental task, a task that would likely require some VFX work to clean up in post. Even though the mirror is fairly basic, the way it was utilized at times and the scale of it added some very intriguing visuals. It's too bad the film wasn't as cool as its massive mirror.
Little food, little drink, camp out for a night or two.
The Bike Riders was supposed to be released in 2023, but with the SAG-AFTRA strike and New Regency having the film The Creator perform rather poorly, they would shop the film around until they sold it to Focus Features, who would release it in June. Despite the studio struggles and difficulties getting this film released, it is chock full of practical elements and some pretty risky practical effects at that. Instead of digitally creating the bike riding scenes or putting the actors on the green screen for the film, director Jeff Nichols wanted the actors to do it for real, and that included not wearing helmets while driving motorcycles. Cinematographer Adam Stone also remarked, "This project was particularly challenging because we had to shoot actors on bikes without helmets in a safe and interpersonal way that's engaging to the audience. We trialed many methodologies: e-bike, pursuit car, and hard mounted on a slingshot. We finally had a eureka moment when we rigged a trike so we could shoot handheld 3 feet from the actors. Shooting in this configuration felt as if you, the audience, were actually on the bike. It was super visceral and engaging." All in all, it's pretty impressive, even if it did cause the director to lose some sleep over the safety of some big name actors. Oddity quietly snuck in for release right behind the most overhyped film of the year in Longlegs, but it has one of the creepiest and most iconic props used in a horror film in recent memory: the Wooden Man. This frightening prop, given as a gift from a sister-in-law, is a fixture throughout the film, and it takes quite a while to understand its purpose. But from the moment it comes on screen, it brings with it an undeniable tension. And good horror films always do these simple practical elements right, and it brings a tactile fear that you don't always get with VFX and CGI at times. This prop in particular was inspired by Jewish folklore of the Golem, a large clay figure who can be brought to life. Funny enough, they barely had time to build this monstrosity before production, with director Damien McCarthy explaining that they worked with the sculpture over Zoom to get the details right. He was sculpting on camera and it was me going, okay, cut off his nose, okay, put his his nose back on. McCarthy would further explain, it was really done in a one-take kind of design, which is crazy when I think about it, for how well it turned out. But that's really down to Paul's talent. We did spend the most time on that day, how to get that frozen scream right.
What's happening?
Swimming in the water.
Alien Romulus did so much practical, from building every creature and bringing back the people that built them on the old movies, to miniatures and animatronics. And while we have talked about that ad nauseum in our 7-part Alien series this year, what I really found impressive in the film was the entire complex they built for the planet. The planetary base and the space station designs, too. Going back to the best Alien films, some of the best components of those films came down to very well thought out set designs, and they continued that for Romulus. While there is definitely augmentation to some of the planetary scenes, I still think the set design is truly the most impressive practical aspect to Alien Romulus. And if you want to know more about all the stuff that happened on that film, you can go check out our Alien series that we've linked below.
Perfect balance of 7 days each. The one and only thing not to forget. You are one.
The Substance was a film I realized at the last second was playing at a theater near me, and I was able to get some tickets to the last showing at 11 p.m. The person sitting next to my group for the film had come by herself because all of her friends, when they found out what the movie was about, did not want to come see it with her. So kudos to her for going by herself. But this is one of the more unique body horror films in recent memory, filled with absolutely disgusting sequences full of needles, blood, and bodies essentially being sliced apart and coming out from inside. All done practically. But if we're being honest, the most horrific scene of this film was of a guy eating shrimp.
People just love that. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Utterly terrifying and uncomfortable. But at the end of the film, the Golem, as they call it, emerges in a bodysuit and makeup combination that took 7 hours to put together. And the monstrosity is so batshit insane that I really can't even show it to you without blurring it out for YouTube. She asked us to put some teeth biting one of the boobs, so we did. Person, the prosthetic and makeup effects designer, said, the suit is all practical except for Moore's screaming face, which was achieved with digital effects. But in the end of the film, the team pulled out a page from Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, allowing the head of this monstrosity to disintegrate for real. We used gelatin skin, Person said, filled with tons of blood bags and disgusting stuff inside that we could blow up.
The best way to bring folks together is to give them a real good enemy.
I know seeing a musical film in the list for best practical effects is a bit confusing, but director John Chu went all out with practically built sets and art design. But for the biggest moment of the film, where Elphaba finally gets to fly and sing, they filmed that for real.
Action.
Practical stunts on wire were used for many of the flying scenes in the film, from lifting wheelchairs into the air to the main character finally taking flight at the end of the film. In a movie that could have been overly reliant on CGI, it is great to see them use similar techniques used for the show version and Broadway version of the story. Even if they still finish it out with VFX in the end, it all blends together beautifully. I'll be honest, for this next film, I wasn't really sure where to put it because it's such a weird production, and their use of wet but dry filmmaking using wire rigs against a volume setup is truly bizarre. It is cool to see people trying some new techniques out with the volume, especially when they don't have the budget to pull off massive practical effects versions of this, of course. But what stands out and looks great was their practical set of the inside of an airplane, which was slowly flooding with water. The director said the production submerged a physical modular airplane set in a water tank, with a cast performing inside for the plane interior sequences. A very complex rig was needed because the angle of the plane was essential to the story. As events proceed, the plane continues to descend along the slope of the trench, calling for the angle to change from one scene to the next at different depths. While I'm still skeptical about how the wet-dry technique turned out, it's impressive what they were able to do practically with the interior of the plane.
Lucius, take your father's strength.
Gladiator 2 has it all when it comes to practical effects, from a massive coliseum to a complete Roman city block to intricate fight sequences and even a taller archway in the coliseum than in the first film to sail ships through. Arthur Max, the production designer who has worked with Ridley Scott on countless films over the years, including the first Gladiator film, noted the differences, saying the main entry arch in the first movie was about 20 feet high. In the sequel, it was a little more than 30 feet high to accommodate the ship that had to come through with its full mast and sail. Yep, you heard that right, large enough to sail a ship into. Ships that Ridley Scott wanted to make as large as possible for a different scene. Ridley wanted 250-foot ships coming in towards this wall where a huge battle is taking place, said special effects supervisor Neil Corbould, but there was no water there. To solve this problem, they would put these massive ships on top of hydraulic building movers to move them around. The rest, of course, would be added in by ILM, the sails, water, even the sky was digitally replaced for this particular battle. But going back to the Colosseum, they would employ a similar approach to building out the ships again to fit inside the arena. This messy take on a love triangle story merged with the sport of tennis and a driving electronic score made by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross is surprisingly one of my favorite films of 2024. The cinematography and shots they developed to keep it interesting and tense throughout were great, but one of the scenes towards the end that was achieved both practically and through digital effects is pretty cool. This scene was shot practically using an Arri Alexa LF versus the 35mm film camera they used for the rest of the film and a standard 30-foot Technocrane. But it would take 5 hours to complete, filming 23 segments with the camera going back and forth, moving like a tennis ball across the court with the crane. They would then take LiDAR scans to compensate for the change in lighting over the course of 5 hours and hand it off to the VFX team to stitch together in post, remap the speed of it, add crowds, and replace the body doubles used in the practical filming for the actors in the film. While this was also achieved with digital effects, it's hard not to add this to the list in a cool way that digital and practical worked together with a team that communicated.
Mr. Midnight, Jack Darrow!
Late Night with the Devil was a great original feeling horror film for 2024. 2024 actually had a lot of great horror films, though Late Night with the Devil probably had the most studio credits before the movie would just finally start. It just went on forever. But one scene in particular was beautifully done and partly practical. We get a glimpse of this in a behind-the-scenes image of the actress and another body double with her head split in two with a green screen suit beneath it. This practical effect paired with digital is really cool how they pulled it off. First, they would have the main actress act this scene out and cut. Then they would go get her into a green screen hood for her head with a prosthetic that was split open, and then put her back into the same position on stage and line her up her arm movements again. It looks like they would shoot long takes of this to have a lot of options to match it up as close as they could in post. To finish up this part, they would film several more scenes of her and then bring in a full-size dummy with a prosthetic head, and again would do the hand movements to match. In the scene, it is augmented with digital effects, of course, but it really helps to sell the effect. There appears to be a lot of other practical effects in this film, but this one absolutely caught our attention.
It is a black omen to journey in poor health.
There are so many cool practical effects elements anytime Robert Eggers puts out a new film. But perhaps one of the most unique tools used for this film was the development of a specialized filter for their night sequences. Cinematographer Jaron Blotchke explained how he was trying to mimic moonlight as best he could on the film. Moonlight will never truly be believable unless you're outside and front lit by the moon, but then you won't be able to see anything in the darkness. We can't. Only see up until Scion or so. There's just something about cutting out the red and the yellow wavelengths that I just bought it more. Moonlight will always be too bright in movies, but that just gets me a little bit closer to the real thing. This in-camera effect gives Nosferatu that perfect gothic vibe at night, which also is helped out by the painstaking effort they went through to light the scenes in the forest at night. And you can find out more about the production of that film right here.